My name is Lauren Pierce, and I'll never forget the night my mother looked across the dinner table, her eyes sharp as glass, and said, "Your success means nothing. Amanda's the only daughter who matters." The air in that restaurant seemed to stop moving. My fork hung mid-air, while my father stared down at his plate like maybe he hadn't heard her, and Amanda smirked behind her wine glass, soaking up every ounce of attention. I'd swallowed words like that for years, trained to smile, to be the calm one, the steady one. But that night something in me split clean in two. I set my fork down, met her glare, and said evenly, "Then watch me cut you out of my life." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt, and I knew deep down that nothing about our family would ever be the same again. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight to be seen in your own family. I grew up in a small suburb outside Nashville, the kind of place where the same families filled the same pews every Sunday, and everyone knew who mowed their lawn. My parents believed in appearances more than anything else, matching outfits for Christmas cards, spotless front porch, perfect smiles, no matter what boiled underneath. My dad owned a small insurance firm downtown, while my mom ran the house like a performance. She had a gift for making everything look effortless, but her patience was saved for only one person, my sister Amanda. Amanda was the family's golden light from the very beginning. My parents told everyone how gifted she was, how she hummed melodies as a baby and painted before she could write her name. They called her our little artist, as though that title made her untouchable. When I brought home spelling bee trophies or straight-A report cards, my mom would pat my shoulder and say, "That's nice, Lauren, but don't make your sister feel bad." I learned early that humility wasn't a virtue in our house. It was a requirement for survival. At 9 years old, I remember standing in front of the living room wall, staring at Amanda's latest painting, a crooked rainbow in thick finger paint that my mom had framed like a masterpiece. My own small trophy from school sat forgotten on a shelf in my room. I told myself it didn't matter, but that small ache never went away. Year after year, I kept hoping for a shift, some sign that my work meant something, but the pattern only deepened. My birthdays were practical new notebooks, hand-me-down sweaters, a $20 bill folded into a blank card. Amanda's, on the other hand, looked like Christmas morning balloons, cakes shaped like ballerinas, expensive gadgets she'd forget about in a week. Whenever I questioned it, Mom's answer was the same, almost rehearsed. "She's special, Lauren. Don't be jealous." As I got older, that phrase became a kind of background noise. I stopped expecting fairness and started depending on myself. By 15, I was waiting tables at a diner just to buy my own clothes. My parents said I was independent, but it was a polite way of excusing their neglect. I worked nights and studied late building habits that would shape the rest of my life, though I didn't see it then. I thought hard work was the only language love could speak. When college came, that lesson cut deeper. My parents told me scholarships were my responsibility, while Amanda's dream of attending a private arts academy became their mission. They hired consultants, took out loans, even bought her a new car so she could commute safely. I remember parking my own rusty Toyota down the block when she showed off her shiny new Jeep, wrapped in a red bow. My dad joked that I should be proud of my little sister's success, as if endurance were pride's substitute. College should have been a clean start, but the old story followed me. I graduated near the top of my class, landed a competitive internship, and called home to share the news. Mom barely paused before saying, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Amanda's planning her first gallery show?" It wasn't cruelty in her voice, it was indifference, and somehow that hurt worse. Every phone call, every visit revolved around Amanda's next big idea, no matter how small or half-formed. Still, I kept pushing forward. If I couldn't earn their love, I could at least build something real. I worked part-time jobs through college, saved every dollar, and dreamed of buying property one day. Independence became my armor. And yet, no matter how strong I felt, part of me still longed for a nod of approval that never came. That longing finally broke on graduation day. I had reserved 3 front-row seats for my parents and Amanda, imagining them cheering when my name was called. Instead, a last-minute text arrived. They couldn't make it. Amanda had an important meeting with an investor. I walked across that stage alone while the families around me clapped and cried. In the photos, I'm smiling, but if you look close, you can see it, the emptiness behind my eyes. Driving home that night, my diploma on the passenger seat, I realized I'd been chasing something that didn't exist. They weren't going to change. Their version of love had conditions, and I was never going to meet them. Somewhere on that quiet stretch of highway, I made a promise from now on I would live for myself, not for their applause. I didn't know it then, but that decision would turn my life upside down, and eventually it would burn every illusion my parents had about who really mattered in our family, because the invisible daughter they ignored was about to become the one they couldn't survive without. After that graduation day, I told myself the worst was behind me. But life at home had a way of proving me wrong. When I stopped calling as often, my parents didn't seem to notice. They had their hands full following Amanda's next big dream. Every phone call I did answer turned into an update about her newest painting, her weekend retreat, her networking dinners that somehow always required my father's credit card. I kept my head down and worked long hours reminding myself that independence was the only thing I could count on. But the truth was, the silence from home cut deeper than I wanted to admit. When I visited that summer, the house looked smaller than I remembered, yet Amanda's presence filled every corner. Her paintings lined the hallway. Her framed photos covered the mantel. My mother greeted me with a quick hug and hurried back to help Amanda hang another canvas for what she called her studio exhibit. My father offered a distracted smile, then asked if I wanted to join them for dinner out. I did, mostly because I didn't want to give them another reason to say I was distant. At dinner, Amanda talked nonstop about her plans to open a design studio. She said she'd already found a space downtown, though I could tell she hadn't thought through the details. My mother nodded eagerly, calling her visionary. When my father asked about the lease, she waved it off. "I'll figure it out." I watched them lean into every word, hanging on her confidence. When I mentioned that I'd been promoted to assistant project manager at work, my mom smiled politely and said, "That's nice, dear. Have you seen the new series, Amanda's Painting?" The conversation shifted without a pause, and I sat there stirring my water, feeling like a stranger at my own family's table. The same pattern played out over and over. When Amanda's ideas faltered, my parents rushed to soften her fall. When I achieved something, they barely blinked. One evening after a long week of work, I stopped by their house to drop off some papers my father needed for taxes. Amanda was there crying over a rejected art show application. My mom had her arms around her, whispering, "You're a special sweetheart. They just don't see it yet." My father was already talking about finding her a better opportunity. Neither of them noticed I was standing in the doorway, holding the manila envelope. I set it quietly on the table and slipped out. By my mid-20s, the distance between my family and me felt impossible to bridge. I'd started saving aggressively, living in a small apartment and skipping the vacations my coworkers took. Every dollar went into a fund I called the future, though I didn't yet know what that future would look like. My parents still treated me like I'd chosen struggle out of stubbornness, while Amanda floated from one idea to the next, always supported, never questioned. When she turned 25, they threw her a grand party at a rooftop restaurant downtown. It had a theme, custom decorations, and a cake shaped like an artist's palette. I wasn't surprised that the night cost more than my rent for 6 months. Halfway through the evening, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice hushed, but pointed. "You should be more like your sister Lauren. She believes in herself." I looked over at Amanda laughing with her friend's champagne glass in hand and realized my mother didn't understand that belief wasn't Amanda's gift, it was her safety net. Not long after that, I got my own taste of independence. My company offered me a small bonus for leading a project that came in under budget. I used it as a down payment on a tiny duplex across town. It was old, the kind of place people drove by without noticing, but I saw potential. When I told my parents about it, my father frowned. "Be careful," he said. "Real estate's risky. You don't want to get in over your head." My mother barely looked up from her phone before asking if I'd seen the photos from Amanda's new art show. I hung up that night knowing they'd never understand what that duplex meant to me. The place was a mess, peeling wallpaper, cracked tiles, a leaky roof, but every bit of progress felt like proof that I was capable of building something on my own. On weekends, I worked alongside a friend from the office, learning to sand floors and replace fixtures. I'd come home sore and covered in paint dust, but I didn't care. I could feel my life changing one nail at a time. By the end of the year, the duplex was fully rented, bringing in a modest income. I reinvested everything. No shopping sprees, no big celebrations, just steady progress. Meanwhile, Amanda's art studio closed after 6 months. She told everyone she wanted to pivot creatively, and my parents echoed her words like a script. "She just needs time," my mom said when I asked how she was doing. I didn't argue. Time was something I'd stopped asking for a long time ago. Each holiday visit reminded me why I kept my distance. The decorations were always the same, but the atmosphere grew heavier. My mother's praise for Amanda had a strained edge now, and my father's temper flared at the smallest things. Money, I guessed, was tighter than they wanted to admit. Yet no one spoke of it openly. I brought small gifts, baskets of food, nice candles, and Amanda arrived with nothing but her smile. Mom would thank her first anyway. When I turned 26, I'd managed to buy 2 more small properties. They weren't in the best neighborhoods, but the numbers worked. I remember mentioning it over dinner one evening, proud but cautious. My father's fork paused midair. "Just make sure you're not gambling," everything he said. "You know how markets can turn." Before I could respond, my mother leaned toward Amanda. "Tell Lauren about your new photography project." And just like that, the conversation slipped away again. By the time Amanda's third venture failed, my parents had stopped pretending everything was fine. They spoke about her in smaller voices, as though her name itself carried weight. I'd listen quietly, and leave without saying what I was thinking. It wasn't my job to save anyone. Still, I couldn't help noticing that my father looked older, his hair thinner, his laugh harder to find. My mother had a new habit of glancing at her phone during conversations, as though searching for a way out. A few months later, I came across my own name in a local business journal, an article about young real estate investors in the city. I'd given a short interview weeks earlier and forgotten about it. When the piece ran, my photo filled half a page, me standing in front of one of my renovated houses, smiling against a backdrop of clean siding and fresh paint. The headline read, "Lauren Pierce, 28, builds $1 million portfolio before 30. I didn't expect it to matter much outside of my industry, but within 2 days, my phone started ringing. My father's voice came first, warm, too warm. "Lauren, your mother and I saw the article. We're so proud of you. Can we talk?" A few hours later, a message from Amanda appeared, light and familiar. "Hey, big sis, didn't know you were doing so well. Maybe we can collaborate your business, and my creative brand could be huge." That one made me laugh. Finally came my mother's text. "Honey, this is amazing. We should celebrate as a family. Call me soon." I let those messages sit unanswered. For weeks, I stayed focused on work managing contractors and tenants, pretending not to notice how quickly the tone had changed. When I finally agreed to meet them for dinner, I already knew what it was really about. My parents didn't want to celebrate me, they needed me. As I walked into the same restaurant where my mother had once told me I didn't matter, the scene felt eerily familiar. Amanda sat across from my father, her smile thin and nervous. My mother greeted me with a trembling kind of affection, one that didn't reach her eyes. I hadn't even opened my menu before my father started explaining about the bank notices, the loans, the missed payments. They were on the verge of losing the house. Amanda's voice cracked as she said, "We just need a little help, Lauren. You're doing so well." I listened quiet and steady, feeling something shift inside me. The girl who had begged for their approval was gone. The woman sitting at that table understood her worth, and she knew the price of every word they were about to say next. When I sat down at that restaurant, the air felt heavier than it had the last time I was there. The same white tablecloths, the same soft lighting, but everything between us had shifted. My parents' smiles looked forced, and Amanda's hands trembled as she folded and unfolded her napkin. I hadn't said more than hello before my father started talking about numbers, missed payments, late notices, debts that had quietly piled up. My mother nodded, eyes glossy, adding that the bank had sent a foreclosure warning. Amanda tried to sound calm, but her voice broke halfway through her sentence. "We just need a little help, Lauren. You're doing so well. If you could lend us something just until we get back on our feet." For a long moment I didn't answer. I just listened, letting the weight of their words settle between us. They spoke about responsibility and family, about sticking together, about being there for each other. Every phrase sounded practiced, like they'd rehearsed it on the drive over. My father's tone softened as he added, "It's not just about the house. We're family, and family takes care of one another. My mother reached across the table, fingers trembling, whispering, "You wouldn't let us lose everything, would you? Even?" Amanda leaned in, desperate, her voice small for once. "I'll work for you, Lauren. I'll do anything you need." I watched them quiet, my hands folded on the table. There was a time when I would have agreed before they even finished the question, just to prove my worth. But that night, something different settled in my chest, a calm I'd never known. I asked, "Do you remember my graduation?" My mother froze. My father's eyes dropped to the menu as if it could save him. Amanda's voice cracked. "That was years ago." I nodded slowly. "It was. You said you wouldn't miss it for the world. Then you skipped it because Amanda had a meeting." My mother started to protest, but I kept going, my voice steady. That was the day I realized what I meant to this family. Nothing. The silence that followed felt endless. Even the waiter refilling water glasses nearby seemed to slow down to avoid interrupting. My father cleared his throat and said softly, "We made mistakes, but this is different. This is about survival." My mother's eyes darted to mine. "We'll pay you back. Every penny with interest. You can take the house as collateral." I looked at Amanda, who sat clutching her phone, her shoulders trembling. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When I finally spoke, my voice came out even controlled. "You built everything around Amanda. Every chance, every dollar, every ounce of pride. You made your choice a long time ago." My mother's expression cracked, but I didn't stop. "You said my success meant nothing. I took that to heart. I built something on my own and you laughed at it. You ignored it. Now you want in because it turned out to matter." I picked up my purse, stood, and laid a few bills on the table to cover my meal. "That ship has sailed," I said quietly, "and it's not coming back." I walked out before they could answer. The sound of my heels against the tile echoed behind me like punctuation marks. For years I'd imagined what it would feel like to finally stand up for myself. I thought it would be loud, maybe angry, but it wasn't. It was calm. It was final. In the weeks that followed, their messages flooded in. My mother wrote long emails about family forgiveness and how she'd raised me better than to abandon them in their time of need. My father left voicemails that started firm and ended with his voice shaking. Amanda sent one text after another, each shorter than the last, until they stopped altogether. I didn't respond to any of them. I kept my phone on silent, worked longer hours, and focused on closing a new property deal that would add 2 more units to my portfolio. 2 months later, I drove through my old neighborhood. It was early evening, the sky bruised with sunset when I turned down my parents' street. Their house looked different from the others now. The lawn was overgrown weeds spilling over the walkway. A bright yellow foreclosure sticker was taped to the front door, the kind you can see from half a block away. My father's truck sat in the driveway loaded with boxes. Amanda was out front, her hair pulled back, lifting another box into the bed. My mother stood near the porch, pale and tired, her hands gripping a folder of papers. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, watching them through the windshield. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just a quiet finality. My mother looked smaller somehow, her shoulders slumped under the weight of everything she'd refused to see. My father looked lost, like a man who'd spent his whole life managing other people's risks, but never learned to manage his own. Amanda caught sight of me for a second. Her expression shifted, maybe recognition, maybe regret. Then she turned away. I didn't get out of the car. There was nothing left to say. I drove off slowly, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the curve of the street. The next morning, I woke up to a new email from my mother sent from an unfamiliar address. It was long pages of apologies and explanations about how they'd been under pressure, how they hadn't meant to hurt me, how family bonds shouldn't be broken over misunderstandings. I closed the message without finishing it. Later that week, my assistant told me a man had stopped by the office asking for me. When she described him, tall gray hair, nervous hands, I knew who it was. My father had come looking for help, maybe just to talk. Security had walked him out before he made it to my desk. Not long after I moved into my new house on the hill, a glass-walled modern build overlooking the city skyline. The first night there, I stood in the living room, the lights off, watching the city glow beneath me. The quiet felt strange but clean, like breathing after a long illness. In the garage sat a car I'd bought outright, sleek and black, the first thing I'd ever bought purely for myself. I thought about everything it had taken to get there, the years of saving, the work, the discipline. And I thought about the night my mother told me my success meant nothing. How wrong she'd been. Amanda found a job a few towns over, working part-time at a craft store. I saw her name online once, tagged in a post about new beginnings and finding peace. My mother still sends emails from time to time, usually before the holidays. My father doesn't write at all, and that's fine. Some silences don't need filling. One afternoon, months later, I was walking through one of my properties, a small complex I'd just finished renovating, when a tenant stopped me in the hallway. "You're the owner, right?" she asked, smiling. "This place is amazing. Thank you for giving it life again." I smiled back, nodded, and continued toward the door. As I stepped outside into the bright air, I realized something simple but undeniable. Everything I'd built, every inch of progress existed because I'd stopped waiting for their permission to begin. I locked the door behind me, looked out at the street, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. They had built their world around a golden child. I had built mine from the ground up. And for the first time, I didn't need them to see the difference. The months after my parents' foreclosure passed in a strange calm. I expected guilt to find me, but it didn't. The house I'd bought on the hill was quiet, surrounded by glass and wind, far removed from the neighborhood where I'd grown up. From my office window, I could see the city stretched out below, a patchwork of lights and motion that felt almost unreal. I filled my days with meetings, paperwork, and property visits, anything that kept me moving forward. My business had become a small but steady enterprise, 9 units across the city, all occupied, all running smoothly. One morning, I met Ellen Grant at a cafe downtown. She'd been my accountant for 3 years, and in many ways, the first person who had ever treated me like I belonged in a boardroom. "You're sitting on something strong, Lauren," she said, flipping through the reports. "If you consolidate these under a holding company, you can start bringing in investors. It's time to think bigger." Her words stayed with me long after the coffee went cold. For so long, I'd focused on survival, on proving that I could stand on my own. But Ellen was right. The foundation I'd built could support more than just stability. It could grow into something lasting. That night, I stayed up late at my kitchen counter, papers spread out around me. I ran numbers, drafted outlines, and by midnight, a plan began to take shape. I'd form a company, Pierce Property Group, a name that carried the weight of my past, but also reclaimed it on my terms. It took weeks of filings, contracts, and long hours, but by spring, the business was official. I hired my first assistant, a young woman named Natalie, who reminded me of myself a decade earlier, eager, quiet, and determined to prove she belonged. While I built my family's, silence lingered in the background. My mother sent the occasional email, shorter, now more polite, almost formal. My father didn't write at all. Amanda resurfaced once through a social media post about starting over, her smile stretched thin over tired eyes. I didn't comment. I had learned the difference between connection and closure. By summer, my portfolio had doubled. Ellen helped me navigate refinancing, and I began acquiring small commercial spaces, old storefronts that most investors overlooked. I liked the challenge of breathing life back into forgotten buildings. The work was hard, but it filled the space that used to ache. On weekends, I drove out to check progress myself. Sometimes standing in those dusty rooms with the light streaming through cracked windows, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who waited for her parents to clap at her victories. She felt distant now, like a character from a story I'd stopped reading. Then one afternoon I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a familiar voice came through, hesitant but clear. "Lauren, it's Amanda." I didn't speak for a moment. She filled the silence quickly. "I'm not calling for money. I just wanted to tell you I got a job. Part-time at a craft store, but it's something." Her voice wavered, but there was a sincerity I hadn't heard before. "I'm trying to do better." I wished her well and hung up gently. It was brief, but it was enough. That call was the first time in years she hadn't asked for anything. As the months rolled on, my success began to draw attention again. A business magazine reached out for an interview, and Ellen insisted I say yes. "You've earned this," she said. The article ran under the headline, "Rebuilding from the Ground Up." It focused on perseverance and entrepreneurship, but what people talked about most was the last paragraph about turning neglect into fuel. Within days, messages flooded in from people I didn't know thanking me for sharing my story. It was strange seeing my life summarized in print, but it also felt freeing. One evening, while sorting through emails, I found one from my father. The subject line was simple: dinner. The message itself was short. "I'd like to talk. No requests, no money, just a conversation." I stared at it for a long time before replying. We met a week later at a small diner near the edge of town. He looked older, thinner, the weight of regret visible in the lines around his eyes. He didn't try to defend anything. "Your mother and I lost more than a house," he said quietly. "We lost our family, and that's on us." I listened, not because I needed an apology, but because he needed to give one. When he stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and slid an old photo across the table me at 9 years old holding a spelling bee trophy. "We should have framed this instead," he said. Then he walked out. Driving home, I placed the photo on the passenger seat beside me. For the first time, the memory didn't sting. It just felt distant, like an old wound that had finally closed. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes. My mother began sending shorter, humbler messages, simple updates about the weather, or a new recipe she'd tried. There were no pleas, no guilt. I didn't respond often, but I didn't block her either. Boundaries didn't need to be loud. They just needed to hold. By autumn, Pierce Property Group had grown to 12 properties and a small staff. The office buzzed with quiet efficiency, and Natalie handled most of the calls with a confidence that made me proud. One afternoon, Ellen stopped by to review the latest numbers. She leaned back in her chair, smiling. "You know, she said you could scale this nationally within 5 years if you wanted. You've done what most people never manage. You turned hurt into structure." I nodded, knowing she was right. The ache that once drove me had transformed into something steadier, a kind of purpose that didn't need anyone else's approval. That winter, as the first snow fell, I walked through the nearly finished renovation of an old textile warehouse downtown. The space was vast and silent, the air crisp with sawdust and cold. I stood near the center, looking up at the high windows where light poured through in long, soft beams. It was hard to believe how far I'd come from the girl who used to eat dinner in silence while her family praised someone else. When I locked up and stepped outside, the city glowed with early holiday lights. The streets were quiet, and the snow softened everything it touched. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward my car. Somewhere behind me, a car horn echoed faintly, followed by a laugh that sounded almost like Amanda's. I turned for just a moment, scanning the crowd, but there was no one there. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was the universe reminding me that even distance can carry a kind of peace. As I drove home that night, I realized I no longer needed to prove anything to them or to myself. The life I'd built was its own proof. And though I didn't know what came next, I knew I'd meet it standing tall with both feet planted firmly in the world I'd created. Winter carried a kind of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The renovations on the warehouse were finished, and my team had turned it into a collection of bright lofts that filled up almost immediately. The company's books were solid, the staff small but steady, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about what came next. Most days started the same way: coffee before sunrise, quiet emails, while the city was still dark, and calls with Ellen to map out the next expansion. By early spring, she called me with something new. "Lauren," she said, "you've hit every target. It's time to take a risk again." She mentioned a distressed property, an abandoned apartment complex near the river that had scared off most investors. It's a mess, she admitted, but the location's gold if you can bring it back to life. I drove out to see it that same afternoon. The building was worn and silent, its paint-chipped windows broken, and weeds curling through the cracked pavement. But under all that ruin, I saw potential. I signed the papers 3 weeks later. The work started immediately. Every wall had to come down, every pipe replaced. I spent long days on site with contractors learning every detail I could. The crew called me the boss who shows up, and it made me smile. Some nights, I stood outside after everyone left, the air thick with dust and promise. It was the first time I felt truly at home in the chaos. Around that time, Amanda reached out again. It started with short texts, nothing dramatic, just polite questions. Then one day she called. "I saw the article about your new project," she said softly. "You're really doing well." Her voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before. No jealousy, no pretense. "I just wanted to say congratulations." It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever gotten from her. We spoke for 10 minutes, maybe less. When we hung up, the silence felt different, lighter somehow. Weeks turned into months, and the project took shape faster than I expected. By summer, the complex was ready for its first tenants. I walked through the finished halls on the morning of the grand opening, fresh paint-polished floors, sunlight spilling across wide windows. I had invited Ellen, Natalie, and a few investors, but no family. It was my day, and I wanted it to belong to the people who believed in me. Just before the ribbon cutting, Natalie handed me an envelope. "Someone dropped this off," she said. My name was written on it in my mother's looping handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a simple note. "We heard about your opening. We're proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." Tucked inside was a photo Amanda and me as kids sitting on the porch with ice cream dripping down our hands. For a moment, my chest tightened. I set it aside carefully and walked out to greet the crowd. The opening was better than I imagined. Reporters came, photos were taken, and that night the city paper ran a story titled, "From Invisible Daughter to Builder of Communities." The phrase caught me off guard, but it fit. Every property I had restored, every space I had brought back, felt like reclaiming something that had once been lost. A week later, I received another email from my father. He wrote that he and my mother had found a small rental in a nearby town. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours. We're starting over." He mentioned that Amanda was living with them temporarily, working part-time and saving money. He didn't ask for help this time, just wanted to share that they were getting by. I read the message twice before closing my laptop. One evening, Ellen invited me to speak at a local business forum about women in real estate. "People need to hear what you've built," she told me. I hesitated, but agreed. The event was held in a renovated hotel ballroom full of entrepreneurs and investors. When I stepped on stage, the lights felt blinding. I talked about small beginnings, about risk, and about the quiet persistence it took to build from nothing. I didn't mention my family directly, but every word carried a trace of that story. Afterward, a woman in the audience approached me in tears. "Your story gave me hope," she said. That night, driving home, I realized the distance between pain and purpose had finally narrowed. As fall approached, Amanda called again. This time, her voice sounded steadier. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I got into a local art program. It's small, but I'm paying for it myself." I could hear pride in her words. "That's good, Amanda," I said. "I'm glad you're finding your way." She paused before replying. "You were right to walk away. It made me see everything clearer." The line was quiet for a long moment before she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words landed softly. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that felt right. "I know." She exhaled, relieved, and we talked about small things after that, the weather, her new job, a painting she was working on. When the call ended, I sat there, phone still in hand, realizing how long it had taken for those 2 words to reach me. Later that week, I visited Ellen's office to finalize an acquisition deal. She looked up from the papers and said, "You've built something extraordinary, Lauren. Most people spend their whole lives chasing approval. You built your own stage." I didn't answer, just smiled. There were moments now when words didn't feel necessary. That winter snow returned to the city, blanketing rooftops and slowing everything down. On Christmas Eve, I received a small package at my office. Inside was a simple wooden ornament, 2 hands shaping a small house, and a card signed "Love, Mom." I placed it on a branch of the tree in the corner of my office and turned off the lights. The glow from the window reflected against the glass walls, quiet and warm. The year that followed brought new projects, new risks, and a calm I hadn't known before. I traveled more, met other developers, and began mentoring young women through a program Ellen helped organize. One of them, a college student named Brianna, reminded me so much of myself that it startled me, the same uncertainty behind her confidence, the same hunger to prove she could make it. Helping her felt like closing a circle I hadn't realized was still open. By the time spring came again, I had built something solid, a business, a reputation, and a peace I didn't think I'd ever find. My family existed somewhere out there, living smaller lives, piecing things together. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies anymore. Sometimes that's enough. One morning as I stood in the lobby of my latest renovation, a bright, open co-working space buzzing with life, Natalie handed me the final paperwork. She smiled. Another one finished. I nodded, taking in the sound of voices, the energy of people building their own futures inside something I'd created. Looking around, I realized I wasn't just building properties anymore. I was rebuilding a story that had once left me invisible. And the best part was knowing this chapter wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning of something much larger, waiting just beyond the horizon. Spring brought a rush of color back into the city, the kind of renewal that felt mirrored in my own life. Business was thriving, and the mentorship program Ellen and I started had taken off faster than we imagined. Every week, young women filled our office for workshops, notebooks, open faces bright with focus. Brianna, one of the newest interns, was among them. She had an energy I recognized, a quiet hunger to make something of herself, even if the world hadn't made space for her yet. Watching her take notes at the back of the room reminded me of who I used to be. Outside of work, I had begun to build a rhythm that wasn't ruled by ambition alone. My mornings were quieter now. I'd wake before sunrise, walk the property line of the latest site, and watch as construction crews arrived with coffee and hard hats. The sound of progress no longer felt frantic, it felt earned. I was learning to enjoy what I'd built instead of bracing for the next challenge. One afternoon, Ellen called unexpectedly. "Lauren," she said, her tone lighter than usual, "there's something you should see." She sent a link to a local business feature, a photo of me and my staff at the opening of the co-working space. The headline read, "Pierce Property Group Redefining Community Growth." It was a small article, but it caught attention. Within a week, I received an invitation from a regional development board asking if I'd consider joining as a consultant. Ellen smiled when I showed her the letter. "You've become exactly what you set out to be," she said. Around that same time, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was Amanda. "Hey," she said softly, "I don't want to take your time, but I'm having my first art showing next month. It's small, just a local gallery, but I'd like you to come." Her voice carried a mix of hope and fear, the same tone I once used when trying to reach our parents. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I said, "Send me the details." The evening of her show, I almost didn't go. I sat in my car for several minutes outside the gallery, watching people walk through the glass doors under a banner that read, "Emerging Voices." Inside the walls were lined with canvases, muted colors, gentle strokes, nothing showy or loud. Amanda stood near the back, talking to a small group of visitors. When she saw me, she froze for a second before walking over. "You came," she said quietly. I nodded. "I told you I would." She showed me her work, her voice steadier now. There was one painting that caught me, a simple piece of two women sitting on a porch, sunlight falling across their hands. "That's us," she said. "The summer we used to eat ice cream before dinner." I looked at it longer than I meant to. There was something honest in it, something I hadn't seen in her art before. She sold 4 pieces that night, enough to make the local paper's weekend feature. Before I left, she hugged me for the first time in years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, even the hard parts." In the weeks after the show, small changes rippled outward. My mother sent a message, a short one, but different. "Amanda told us about your visit. I hope you're both doing well." It wasn't an apology, but it felt like an opening. My father wrote soon after, sharing that they had downsized again, this time into a modest house outside town. "We're comfortable," he said. "Your mother started volunteering at the library. It's good for her." I didn't reply, but I read the message twice. Business grew steadily through the summer. We landed a city contract to restore a block of old row homes into affordable rentals. The project meant more meetings, more staff, and a new level of visibility. During one site visit, Ellen and I stood beneath scaffolding while the sound of hammers echoed around us. "This is it," she said. "You've built something that's going to outlast you." I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me. By mid-July, Brianna's internship was ending. On her last day, she handed me a small gift, a framed photo of the mentorship group. On the back, she had written, "Thank you for seeing me when others didn't." I kept it on my desk, next to a model of my first duplex. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered what all those late nights and long years had been for. One late evening as I was finishing paperwork, the front desk buzzed. Natalie's voice came through the intercom. "Lauren, there's someone here to see you." I frowned. It was after hours. "Who is it?" I asked. "A man," she said quietly. "He says his name is Richard Pierce." The name pulled the air from the room. For a moment I couldn't move. Then I told her to send him in. My father stepped into the office, hat in hand, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was grayer now, his shoulders slightly hunched. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said. "I didn't know where else to go." I motioned for him to sit. He talked for a long time, mostly about the past year, the foreclosure, the rentals, how he and my mother were managing. Then he grew quiet. "Your mother's not well," he said finally. "She's been having chest pains. The doctors say it's stress-related, but I think it's more than that." He looked up, his eyes red. "She misses you, Lauren. She doesn't say it, but I know she does." I sat back, unsure what to say. The last image I had of my mother was her face at that restaurant years ago, cold, sharp, unyielding. Now hearing she was fragile felt surreal. My father sighed. "I know we failed you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I don't want her to leave this world thinking she can't fix things." He stood gripping his hat. "Just think about it. That's all I ask." After he left, I sat in the empty office, the hum of the city muffled by glass walls. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to shut the door on that chapter forever. But another part, the one that had watched Amanda rebuild, wondered if closure wasn't the same as weakness. The following weekend, I drove out to the small house my parents now rented. It sat at the edge of a quiet street lined with maple trees. When my mother opened the door, she looked thinner, paler, but her eyes softened as soon as she saw me. "Lauren," she whispered. We stood there for a long moment before she reached out and pulled me into a careful hug. "I didn't think you'd come." Inside the house was modest but warm. Photos of the family lined a single shelf, old birthdays, school plays, even one of me in a graduation cap I didn't know they had. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. My mother's voice trembled as she spoke. "I read about your company in the paper. You've done so much, Lauren. I used to tell myself I favored Amanda because she needed me more. But the truth is, you reminded me of myself, the part that fought too hard, cared too much." I didn't know how to handle that. Her words came haltingly, each one breaking a piece of the silence we'd built. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for everything." I didn't cry, and neither did she. We just sat there, two women who had finally stopped pretending. Before I left, she handed me a small box. Inside was a tarnished locket I hadn't seen since childhood, a tiny picture of Amanda on one side and me on the other. "I kept it," she said quietly, even when I didn't know how to show it. Driving home, the road stretched out ahead, the sky fading to gold. For the first time in years, the past didn't feel like a weight. It felt like something I could finally set down. The weeks after visiting my mother passed quietly. I threw myself back into work, but the conversation we had at her kitchen table stayed with me. The image of her sitting there, frail yet steady, trying to make peace with the daughter she once ignored, was something I couldn't shake. It wasn't forgiveness that had changed me, it was understanding. There was a difference. Summer arrived early that year, warm and unrelenting. My company had just closed on a set of properties along the edge of the riverfront, a development that would take the next 18 months to complete. It was the kind of project that tested patience and foresight permits budgets long days with contractors, but I welcomed it. Work had always been my language for moving forward. One afternoon, Ellen stopped by my office with lunch. "You look like someone who hasn't taken a breath in days," she said, setting a bag on my desk. "You should slow down before you burn yourself out." I smiled, shaking my head. "You know me. I don't sit still well." She laughed softly. "You're allowed to rest, Lauren. You've earned it." Later that evening, I stayed late at the office, catching up on invoices. As the sun dipped below the skyline, my phone buzzed. It was Amanda. Her voice sounded different now, steady, almost calm. "Mom's been doing better," she said. "She started painting again. Dad says she's sleeping more." There was a pause. "She keeps a photo of you on her desk. I didn't know what to say to that." Amanda continued, "We were thinking, maybe you'd like to come for dinner this weekend. Nothing big, just us." That invitation lingered with me. For years, family dinners had been battlegrounds of comparison, quiet humiliations masked as small talk. Now the idea of sitting at that same table with those same people felt surreal. Still, something in Amanda's tone made it hard to say no. "I'll think about it," I told her. She sounded hopeful. "That's all I ask." When Saturday came, I drove out to their house at sunset. It was small but neat, a single story with a porch light glowing in the fading light. My father met me at the door, smiling nervously. "We weren't sure you'd come," he said. Inside, the smell of roast chicken and herbs filled the air. My mother stood by the stove, thinner but more alert, her hair pulled back neatly. When she turned, her eyes softened. "You look good," she said. "Busy suits you." We sat down to eat the table set, simply no fancy centerpieces, no tension. Amanda brought out a bowl of salad, chatting about her latest project, a mural for a community center downtown. My father asked about my company genuinely, this time not as a polite formality. For once, the conversation flowed easily. Halfway through dinner, my mother reached for my hand. "You know," she said quietly, "we used to talk about you all the time after you left. Your father would bring home the newspaper, and if there was an article about you, he'd cut it out and save it." My father chuckled softly. "She's right. There's a folder in the drawer. We just didn't know how to tell you." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years I'd believed they hadn't noticed my success. Maybe they had. They just hadn't known how to face what that said about themselves. After dinner, we sat outside on the porch. The air was heavy with the scent of summer grass and distant rain. Amanda brought out 3 glasses of iced tea, and for a while we just sat there in silence. My mother looked out at the trees and said, "I used to think loving one child meant giving everything to her. I see now that love doesn't work like that." Her voice wavered slightly. "You didn't need us the way she did, so I convinced myself you didn't need love either. I was wrong." Her words fell softly, almost carried away by the breeze. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You don't have to explain," I said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I needed to say it." As the sky darkened, my father leaned back in his chair. "You've made something we never could have imagined," he said. "I just hope you know we're proud of you." I nodded, the lump in my throat, too tight for words. When I left that night, Amanda walked me to the car. The porch light flickered above us. "She's been different since you came back," she said. "Dad, too. It's like they finally exhaled." She hesitated before adding, "I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for not giving up on us completely." I hugged her, something we hadn't done in years. "We're all just trying to figure it out," I said. Driving home, I thought about the years I'd spent chasing acknowledgement, mistaking it for love. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing it, and that was what made reconciliation possible. My life didn't revolve around their approval anymore, it stood on its own. The next morning, I met Ellen for coffee. She listened as I told her about the dinner, her eyes warm with quiet pride. "You've come full circle," she said. "It's not about winning anymore, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it's about peace." Later that week, I visited the mentorship program for its 1-year anniversary. The office buzzed with laughter and energy as the new class arrived. Brianna stood near the front, helping set up chairs. When she saw me, she waved. "We saved you a seat," she called out. I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth of belonging, something I had built, not inherited. As the session began, I looked around the room, young women bright-eyed, curious, ready to learn. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to prove I was worth seeing. Now here I was, helping others see themselves. That realization settled over me gently, like a final piece falling into place. That night, as I walked through my home, the city lights glowing beyond the windows, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Amanda, a photo of the painting she'd been working on. It showed a woman standing on a hill, sunlight breaking behind her. Below it, she'd written, "I called it The Builder. Thought you'd like to see." I stood there for a long time looking at that picture, the light from the screen spilling across my hands. The girl I used to be, the one who waited for someone else to see her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built her own foundation strong enough to stand on, wide enough to share. The next few months unfolded in a quiet rhythm that felt almost new. Work kept its steady pace, the mentorship program grew, and for once I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. Life had softened around the edges, turning from a race into something that finally felt like peace. Every day began with the same calm pattern: coffee by the window, a walk through the garden outside my office, and then the sound of my team arriving one by one, ready to build something meaningful. Amanda and I spoke more often now. Our conversations were easy light, sometimes even funny. She'd send pictures of new paintings or updates about the art classes she taught on weekends. One afternoon, she called just to tell me that Mom's health had improved, that Dad had started helping with the community garden behind their house. "They talk about you a lot," she said. "They still feel guilty sometimes, but I think they're proud in a real way now." I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "That's enough for me," and I meant it. In late autumn, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership summit in Chicago. Standing backstage before my panel, I thought about how far I'd come from that nervous college graduate waiting for parents who never showed up to her ceremony. When my turn came, I walked to the microphone and spoke about what no one had ever taught me, that success built on resentment never lasts, but success built on purpose can change everything. I told them that peace doesn't come when others finally recognize you. It comes the day you stop needing them to. When the applause faded, a young woman approached me afterward. She looked barely 20, eyes bright with tears. "I don't have anyone who believes in me," she said. "How do you keep going when you're on your own?" I smiled and told her what I wish someone had told me years ago. You start small, you work quietly, you become the person you needed. After the conference, I flew home and went straight to the riverfront site my team had been developing for nearly 2 years. The last building was finished that week, a set of affordable homes built for single parents and veterans. Children were already running through the courtyard laughing as volunteers hung up string lights. Ellen stood beside me, hands in her pockets, smiling. "Look at what you've done," she said softly. "You didn't just build houses, Lauren. You built stability." Her words stayed with me that night as I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker below. For a long time, I believed justice meant making people regret how they treated me. But now I understood it differently. Justice wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It was reclaiming the dignity that had been chipped away piece by piece and using it to build something that made life better, not just for myself, but for others too. A week before Christmas, I drove out to my parents' house for dinner. The porch light was still the same soft yellow glow I remembered from childhood. When I stepped inside, my mother met me with a smile and a warmth I never thought I'd see again. The table was simple roast chicken bread rolls, a small vase of flowers Amanda had brought from her studio. We talked about everything and nothing, laughter spilling into quiet pauses that didn't feel heavy anymore. Before I left, Mom pressed a small wrapped box into my hand. "Just something old," she said. Inside was a photo of me from years ago standing with my first "For Rent" sign in front of that battered duplex. On the back, she'd written, "We finally see what you saw all along." Driving home that night, snow began to fall, catching the headlights in soft glimmers. I thought about all the versions of myself that had carried me to this moment, the child desperate to be noticed, the woman who fought alone, the builder who learned to stand firm. Every one of them had led here to peace, to purpose, to a life that no longer needed proof. Now, when I think about family, I don't see it as something that broke me. I see it as the fire that forged me. The distance, the pain, even the silence, they shaped a woman capable of creating her own light. And in that light, I finally found my place. If you've ever felt unseen or unappreciated by the people who should have loved you most, I hope my story reminds you that your worth was never theirs to define. Build your peace anyway. Build your joy anyway. The life you create for yourself will speak louder than any apology you'll ever receive. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and remember, no matter how late it comes, peace is always worth the wait.